Hello, everybody. It's me, Pierino the Pocket Mouse, and I have a very special little book to read to you today. It's called Little Mouse Crusoe by Racey, and it's about a little mouse, and it's got sailing and stuff. It's like a perfect book for me, so I hope you will enjoy it. Little Mouse Crusoe, written and illustrated by Racey, a Barnaby Little Mouse book. Collins, 14 St. James Place, London. Copyright, printed in Great Britain. Collins Clear Type Press, London and Glasgow, 1948. And is a dedication to John and Pat Montgomery, who live on Barnaby's Banana Tree Island, but whose hearts are ever with those who stay at home. Chapter 1, Storm and Shipwreck. Have you ever been to Sand Beach Bay for your summer holidays? If you have, you will understand why Barnaby and the Little Mouse family were having such a wonderfully jolly time, for this year they had gone to pretty Sand Beach Bay for 2 whole weeks. Now, it was on the 3rd day of the holidays that the big adventure for Barnaby, and what an adventure it was! He had carried a chair down to the water's edge for Millicent, and had started to help the children build a sand castle, when his eye caught the gleam of oars from a boat being rowed by a bunny at some distance from the shore. Now, Barnaby loved the sea. It had always attracted him, and he wondered why he had never thought to take a boat out. It must be lots of fun, he thought, to go merrily bounding over the waves, watching the little fish sporting round one's boat, and listening for the lovely song of the mermaids. His thoughts were broken into by Millicent's pretty voice. "I am going to read my book, Barnaby," she was saying. "Will you put my scissors and thread in your pocket, and my best needle in the lapel of your coat to keep them safely until I want to use them again?" Barnaby, still looking at the distant boat, took them and dutifully did as she required. Then, happening to glance down, he caught sight of the name of Millicent's book. It was called Robinson Crusoe. "He was a sailor, wasn't he, Millicent?" he said, pointing to a picture in the book of a man standing on a raft. Millicent nodded. "It is such an exciting tale, Barnaby," she told him. "Seamen do seem to have the jolliest adventures." "I should have gone to sea, for I'm sure I should have been a good sailor," stated Barnaby. He left the children to their sand castle and wandered away, but still with his eyes following the bunny's dancing boat. Presently he bumped into an old frog dressed in a soiled blue jersey with a sailor's cap perched on his head. "Wanna hire a boat, me hearty?" croaked the frog. Barnaby was just about to give a polite "no thank you" when he paused. Then, "Yes, please, I think I will go out for a row, as it is such a nice day," he said. Thus did he find himself, 5 minutes later, happily seated inside a boat and pulling away at the oars. It was the first time he had ever tried to row, and, truth to tell, he did not make a very good job of it. Sometimes the oars would miss the water altogether, which would make him fall over backwards, with his legs wildly waving in the air. Sometimes they would sink so deep that he had a job to move them through the water at all, and would find, when at last the blades appeared again, that they were covered with seaweed and perhaps a crab or two. This was most vexing. Barnaby had not supposed before that rowing was so difficult. Matters were not improved by the appearance of a seagull who gave cackles of laughter every time Barnaby tumbled off his seat. "Feeling tired, friend?" the bird would ask in a most unmusical voice. "That's right, have a nice lie down and a good sleep. You'll feel better then." It was while glaring at this rude creature that Barnaby lost one of his oars. How it happened he never really knew, but suddenly a wave seemed to make a grab at it, and it was gone from his hand. He leaned far over to try to reach it before it floated away, and in doing so, he lost his grip on the other one, and that too was lost. "Oh dear," gasped Barnaby. "Whatever shall I do? Perhaps someone will see me from the shore and come after me in another boat." But alas, when he looked around, he saw that he had drifted so far from the shore that there was not the least sign of it. Now even the seagull had disappeared, so that he seemed to be quite alone in the middle of nowhere. To make matters worse, the sea was getting very bad-tempered over something, perhaps because Barnaby was sitting in his boat on it. Whatever the reason, it certainly began to behave in a most aggravating manner. The mouse, clinging to the seat with both hands, hoped with all his little heart that the waves would soon get tired of chasing one another around in such a rambunctious manner and would be kind enough to take him back to land again. But no! They were in a rampagious mood and made the boat race up and down and round about until poor Barnaby scarcely knew whether he was on his head or his heels. Soon darkness came, and rain began to drive down. Barnaby had never been so wet, miserable, and frightened before in the whole of his little life. Suppose the boat filled with water. Suppose the waves and rain should swamp it. Suppose... How long the storm lasted, Barnaby did not know, though to him it seemed like weeks. But at last the rain ceased and the moon appeared in the sky. By its light he stood upon the seat and looked for the shore. There was a shore near at hand, sure enough, but somehow it did not seem at all like Sand Beach Bay. Barnaby could see a line of foam-girt rocks, and beyond them, silvered by the moonlight, a strip of beach. But there did not appear to be any winkle stars or boats drawn up on the shingle. Perhaps I have drifted along the coast of Blackpool, he thought, or Western Supermare. As the boat drew nearer to the shore, the waves grew more and more fierce, until with a splintering crash, the little craft was tossed against a jagged rock, and Barnaby found himself struggling in the water. Luckily it was shallow water, and he was able to make his way, with much gasping and splashing, to the beach. Here, cold, wet, tired and miserable, he sat down under a rock and waited to see what the morning would bring. This certainly is not Sand Beach Bay, he told himself. I seem to have been wrecked on a foreign shore, just like Robinson Crusoe. I do hope there are no fierce blackamoors about. Chapter 2. Tortoise to the Rescue. When at last daylight came, Barnaby could see that this was indeed a foreign shore. There were no familiar breakwaters on this beach, no donkeys, no ice cream stalls, nothing but an endless curve of yellow sand, backed by the thick green of the strangest sorts of trees. These trees seemed to be made mostly of stems, like flowers, with a mop of green feathers at their tops, in which parrots fluttered and cried to each other with shrill voices. I cannot see any apple trees, but perhaps some of these funny trees have some sort of fruit growing on them, thought Barnaby. He was in luck, for not far away was a tree covered with fat yellow bananas. Barnaby had gathered, peeled, and eaten half a dozen, almost before you could say, "Little Mouse Crusoe." He saw that great shining oranges were there for the picking too, and many other fruits such as he had never seen before, but which were simply delicious when he sampled them. Thus, picking and eating, did he wander on. So far did he go that soon he could no longer hear the booming of the waves upon the beach. Brightly colored butterflies, as big as slices of bread and butter, thought Barnaby, hovered over the gay flowers which grew in great clusters about his path. And tiny birds darted like living jewels in and out of them, seeking honey just like bees. But suddenly, just as Barnaby was about to tug down an extra big orange, a harsh voice shouted almost in his ear. Barnaby nearly jumped out of his fur. "Hello, unfortunate mousikins," said the voice, and looking up, Barnaby saw, with a sigh of relief, that the speaker was no hungry blackamoor, but a tiny parrot. "Good morning," said Barnaby, bowing politely. "My name is B. Little Mouse, Esquire. May I ask why you think me so unfortunate?" The parrot gave a shrill scream of laughter. "You will think yourself unfortunate presently when you hear what I have to tell you," it replied. "For 'tis only unfortunate creatures who come to the island of the big snake." Barnaby did not like the sound of this at all. "The island of the big what?" he faltered. "Snake," nodded the parrot. "This land is not at all a nice one for fat little creatures such as you, for, you see, the big snake is always hungry. He never seems to have enough to eat, poor fellow, and so he is continually on the hunt for his next meal." Barnaby was now really alarmed. "You do not mean to tell me that there are snakes on this island?" he gasped. "No, not snakes, only one snake. He gobbled up all the others. Indeed, there is a little on the island he hasn't gobbled up. I remember my poor Uncle Jeremy, but that is a sad story. The big snake would eat me too, only I'm a little too spry for that." The parrot sighed. "Poor little fat creature. I feel sorry for you. He is certain to fancy you for his supper." "Not if I can help it," gasped the mouse, and he flew back to the beach as fast as his legs would carry him. He ran so fast that he almost fell over 2 damp-looking wooden boxes which the storm had sent ashore. Barnaby looked at them one way, and then he walked round and looked at them the other way. "I wonder what can be in these," he mused. There was only one way to find out. Dragging and pulling by turns, and with lots of puffing and blowing, he managed to move them to a small cave which seemed to be out of reach of the water. Then, with a big sharp stone to help him, he began to prise off the lid of the biggest. Perhaps they are full of lovely cheddar cheese, or scrumptious Christmas puddings, he told himself hopefully. The excitement of his find had made him forget all about the big snake. But when the boxes were opened, Barnaby saw that they contained nothing to eat at all. Instead, the first contained woolen blankets. Of all things, blankets, scoffed Barnaby, while the other proved to be crammed with all sorts of nails, screws, hammers, and saws. I should have much preferred cheese, especially cheddar cheese, sighed Barnaby as he gazed at them. But I suppose blankets and carpenter's tools might turn out to be very handy. And indeed, almost at once he thought of one use to which he could put the blankets. Taking one out of its box, he spread it in the sun to dry, and then went off to find a straight stick. When he had found one, he took out Millicent's tiny scissors. "Dear Millicent," he sighed, cut a round piece from the blanket, though not as neatly, perhaps, as Millicent would have done, and soon had a jolly little sunshade ready. Then, with his little wifey's needle and thread, he made a cap to keep the sun from scorching his head. Now, indeed, he looked a real Crusoe, and like the real Crusoe, he was soon surprised to find footprints in the sand. They were strange footprints, unlike any he had ever seen before, and he could not imagine what sort of creature had made them. You see, they were almost round in shape, just as if the creature walked on wooden legs. Barnaby followed them for quite a distance, until at last they disappeared into the grasses above the sand. Now, what animal has round feet? Wondered Barnaby. There's the elephant, the hippo, the rhino, but I'm sure they would be far too big to make silly little footmarks like these. I wonder. Then, all at once, as he paced thoughtfully back, he came face to face with a huge green snake, bigger than any the little mouse had ever imagined existed, and wearing such a horrid grin that Barnaby became quite rooted to the spot with terror. The big snake! The parrot was right then. He would make a snake supper. Slowly, with darting tongue, the snake advanced. "Good day, little animal," it hissed. "And how are we today, eh? Well, I trust." "You certainly look well, one might say remarkably well. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that you look positively fat and blooming. Yes, quite fat." Barnaby watched fascinated, while thoughts came to him of home. Poor Millicent, how she would miss him. Poor babies, too, so soon to lose their loving papa. Any moment now, Millicent would be a mouse widow, and her children fatherless. "Dear little animal, how pleased I am to meet you," hissed the snake. "An extreme pleasure, I'm sure, to become acquainted with someone so round and plump and pleasant-looking. We must have supper together." And the naughty creature's shiny coil slithered over the sand, nearer and nearer. Then something unexpected happened. Just as Barnaby was about to close his eyes and await his fate, crash! A tortoise, who had been standing on the low cliff above, seeing the danger, had flung himself down, right on top of the snake's ugly head, making it as flat as pancake. "Saved!" shouted Barnaby, dancing with joy. "Oh, thank you. You rescued me just in the nick of time." The tortoise picked himself up and looked at the snake. "That seems to be the end of him," he said. "He will never trouble anyone again." And he grinned and winked and nodded in such an engaging manner that Barnaby quite forgot his fright. "I'm Barnaby," the mouse said, as he grasped the other's hand and shook it warmly. Then he saw that it was not really much like a hand. It was round and stumpy, the sort of thing, in fact, that had made those funny marks in the sand. "Glad to make your acquaintance," said his new friend, bowing politely. "My name is Tortoise, and I'm very glad I dropped in on you, so to speak, when I did. Now, instead of the big snake using you for a meal, we will make use of his skin." "Wouldn't my little Millicent love a pair of shoes made from it?" sighed Barnaby, and he told Torty all about his home. "Your home does sound jolly," said Torty, "and I am sure Millicent must be the very nice person in the whole world. But now we must celebrate the end of that wicked old snake, mustn't we? And the best way to celebrate is to have a feast," ended Barnaby. Torty nodded. "That's right. So now I will go off into the green to gather coconuts and other good things." Torty was hopping first on one leg, then on the other in his excitement. "And you can catch some fish." So Barnaby, with some of Millicent's thread tied to a stick and a bent nail for a hook, went fishing. "Don't forget to catch whoppers," grinned Torty as he stumped away into the green. Chapter 3. Building the House on the Hill. Sitting on a flat rock, Barnaby quietly waited for the fish to bite. Plash swiggle! He caught a nice fat one of Torty's whoppers, and dropped his line in the water again. How peaceful it all was. The sun was sinking in the west, barring the horizon with red and gold. A seabird flew homeward. The sea sang gently. But all at once Barnaby's quick ears caught another sound, a sort of sucking, sighing noise, which came from behind him and was not at all pleasant to hear. Barnaby looked quickly over his shoulder. Jumping grasshoppers! One look was enough, for an octopus was moving towards him, with long tentacles, snaking out in a most unfriendly way. As quick as it takes to tell, Barnaby had leapt from that rock and next moment was racing up the beach as fast as his little legs could carry him, his fishing rod in one hand, his whoppers in the other, and his sunshade waving wildly about from the end of his tail. Torty, his arms loaded with fruit, was just coming from among the trees. "Oh my, you do look scared, Barnaby," he said, and when he heard about the octopus, he stated that they had better not leave each other again, or one day something uncomfortable might happen to one of them. However, they quickly forgot about unpleasant things. A fire was built, and seated in its comforting glow, they enjoyed such a jolly feast, eaten so much that when everything was finished, they were quite unable to move and fell asleep where they sat. Next morning, they decided to build themselves a house. "We will make our house on the very top of the tallest hill," said Torty, "so that we will be able to see any ships that come this way." It was hard work building that little house, and I'm afraid the builders had more than one accident. 6 separate times Torty fell from the roof, landing unhurt because of the hardness of his shell. Indeed, he seemed to enjoy falling off roofs. And once Barnaby hit his thumb, bump, with a hammer, and began to do a most extraordinary dance. Torty, who thought this fine fun, picked up the hammer and, waving it wildly about his head, started to waddle round making queer wailing noises, which he called his Indian war cry. But at last the house was finished. It was certainly on the smallish side, but it was comfortable, and in the eyes of 2 people at least, was just as nice as Buckingham Palace. Inside they placed their homemade furniture, 2 chairs made by Barnaby, though they did not look very much like chairs, and what Torty called his multiplication table, a table with 7 legs. Yet with all these comforts, Barnaby was sometimes unhappy. You see, he was continually thinking of his other home, far, far away across the sea, and of the dear ones who waited there for his return. Often Torty would find him seated on a boulder with his head resting in his hands, gazing out across the ocean and looking very sad. At such times, Torty would sit quietly by his side, feeling sad too. He wished with all his kind heart that he could do something to make his friend happy again. The sight of that sad little face with its drooping whiskers made his heart almost break.
"Never mind, Barnaby,"
he would whisper.
"One day I'm sure you will be back in that pretty home about which you speak so often. One day a ship will come this way, see our signals, and take you away."
"And you, Torty," Barnaby would add. "I could not leave you behind, but no ship ever comes." And he would begin to think that he would never see his loved ones again. One lovely evening, the two friends were strolling along the beach, as they always did before going to bed, when all at once Torty clutched at Barnaby's arm.
"Look, Barnaby, a huge monster," he croaked. "Oh my, whatever shall we do? It's a monster from the sea."
Much to Torty's wonderment, the mouse gave a shout of joy and ran excitedly right up to the monster. Torty could hardly believe his eyes. "It's my boat, Torty, you old silly, not a monster at all," Barnaby cried. "My old boat has been washed ashore after all this time." And as he said the words, he knew that here, at last, was a chance to leave the island and try to reach home. Torty trudged warily up to the boat and peered at it doubtfully.
"It has one or two holes here and there," he said, "but I suppose the water that comes in through one hole can pour out again through the next one."
Barnaby laughed. "If we can build houses, I'm sure we can mend holes in boats," he said. "Tomorrow, Torty, tomorrow we will set to work." You may be sure Barnaby did not sleep well that night, and not only because of his own excitement, but also because Torty would keep sitting up in bed to mutter things such as,
"I wonder whether Millicent will like me," and "I do hope we can make the boat ship-shape."
Yes, sleep was a long way away from them that night. Chapter 4. Homeward Bound. Bright and early next morning, the two carpenters, with their box of tools carried between them, set off for the beach, and soon there was such a sound of hammering and singing that all the parrots on the island flew to see what the rumpus was about. Some of them perched on the boat itself and offered hints on how holes really should be mended, while one old parrot, who had eaten too much breakfast, said dolefully that the thing would certainly sink, and Barnaby and Torty would end up as food for the fishes. "We will leave this place even if we have to swim all the way," said Barnaby. The old bird shook his head. "It might seem a lark when you start to embark," he told them, "but it's lonely and dark inside of a shark." Yet Barnaby and Torty went on banging merrily away, faster and faster, just as if they were two 8-day clocks, and couldn't stop until their springs had run down. Indeed, so busy were they that they scarcely stopped for meals, and only the setting of the sun made them leave their work and return to their hut again. The next day they had finished. Barnaby put down his hammer and gazed happily at the beautiful result of all that hard work. "Well, it certainly looks as if it will float now," he grinned. Torty was busy admiring the blanket he had just nailed up to act as a sail.
"It's the best little boat that ever was," he stated. "Though I wish I had an admiral's hat to wear. You know, one of those three-cornered things. I should feel more like a sailor then."
The old parrot grunted. "What use is a sailor's hat to a person who doesn't know one end of a boat from the other?" he scoffed. "Mark my words, fish's food." The birds were still watching when the two friends pushed off from the shore and set sail. "Goodbye, island," cried Barnaby, waving his hand. "Goodbye, I shall often think of you." The island, as it grew smaller and smaller in the distance, seemed to smile in reply. There was little more to tell. Luck was with those brave hearts aboard the good ship Susan, and with warm breezes to carry them merrily along, it was not long before, one fine morning, they saw land on the skyline, and Torty caught his first glimpse of Barnaby's own island. "Home, home at last," sighed Barnaby. Torty was soon to find that he had come home too. How joyful everyone was to see them. When Millicent first opened the front door and saw Barnaby standing there, she hugged him and laughed and cried all at the same time. "Oh, Barnaby, we never thought to see you again," she cried. "And I never expected to see you, Millicent," said Barnaby. Then he turned towards Torty, who was standing back bashfully. "This, dear Millicent, is my friend Torty," Barnaby explained, and told her all about Torty saving him from the big snake. And when Millicent took Torty's stubby hand and said he must stay with them for always, the children simply shrieked with joy. Uncle Torty may often be seen taking the children for their afternoon walk in the park. If you should happen to see them, stop and have a talk, for Torty loves telling about his adventures. As for the other adventures he and Barnaby had together, well, we will save those up for a rainy day. The end.